In the shadow of jagged peaks, where mist weaves eternal veils between the living and the lost, a solitary figure tends an ancient flame, bound by whispers that echo from the ravine's depths, souls adrift, seeking passage or peril on the farewell way. Duty weighs like fog on his shoulders, a fragile light against the encroaching night that devours hope. Yet in this veiled world of half-forgotten legends, one pre-dawn stirs the silence with an unnatural hum, drawing eyes to the sky as the valley awakens to secrets long buried. And here in this perch, in the hush of pre-dawn, a drone hums like a distant prayer, gliding over the mist-veiled village that clings to the mountain's flank like frost on stone. Below, rooftops huddle in grayscale surrender, their edges blurring into the ravine's yawning throat, where the farewell way snakes unseen into twilight's maw. The air hangs heavy, cooling from night's fever, and the valley breathes in shallow rhythms, slow inhalations of fog that swallow sound, exhale only echoes of what was. Here, in this perch above the abyss, the legend unfurls like smoke from a dying fire. Long before the stones wore smooth under forgotten feet, a solitary keeper was bound to the flame, not by chain or oath spoken aloud, but by the weight of souls who wandered too close to the edge, their whispers curling into the dark like pleas for one last glow. He tends it still, this Marin Voss, a silhouette etched against the ridge, his form a ritual etched in isolation. The village stirs faintly in the indifferent light of dawn, faces turned inward, their silence a reverent shroud. They speak of him in murmurs that dissolve before they reach the air. Guardian, relic, the hand that holds back the void. Yet, as the mist coils thicker, pooling in the hollows like unspoken regrets, a subtle shift stirs the stillness. The drone lingers on the trailhead, where shadows pool deeper than the fog, and the village's quiet admiration frays at its edges. They watch from afar, hearts tethered to the ritual's promise, hoping the light will beckon again, draw forth whatever phantom seeks passage. But in that suspended breath, doubt hums low, an inner tolling, amplifying the void within the keeper's vigil. Does the glow serve the endless routine, flickering blindly into emptiness, or does it bend to the living, to the fragile hopes pressing against the cold? The valley settles into meditation, its pulse sinking to the slow unraveling of gray into pallid gold, the weight of expectation settling like dew on every sill. And there, organic as breath, the lantern waits at the ridge's lip, not blazing, not calling, but present, its form a quiet sentinel in the monochrome haze, casting no direct gleam, yet implying the pull of all that might follow. As the first hints of light stirred the air, the dawn clung to the village like a reluctant shroud, gray mist curling at the edges of the stone mill's weathered eaves. Marin Voss moved through it with the precision of long habit, his boots scraping softly against the gravel path that skirted the ravine's lip. In his gloved hands, the lantern hung steady, its flame a muted pulse against the fog's dull embrace. A glow not bright enough to pierce the haze, but insistent, drawing the eye like a half-remembered dream. He paused at the trailhead overlook, the ancient iron hook of the lantern post waiting like an outstretched claw. With deliberate care, he adjusted the wick, his fingers tracing the cool brass rim where the glass met metal. The flame steadied, blooming just enough to cast elongated shadows that danced with the mist's lazy swirls. It was ritual, this tending, a turn of the key, a breath to coax the oil's slow burn. No more, no less. The light was his charge, eternal and unyielding, just as the village elders had bound it to him years ago, when the previous keeper's silhouette had faded into the farewell way without a backward glance. From the clustered homes below, whispers rose like steam from cooling earth. They started faint, threading through the morning chill, the villagers stirring, their voices a low murmur that blended with the distant grind of the mill's unoiled stones. "There he goes again," one said, an old woman's tone laced with the reverence of rote prayer. "The light that calls the lost home, or away forever," another voice, younger, edged in. "Eli says the first keeper followed it himself into the glow that swallowed the child. What if it's not guidance, but a hunger?" The words hung, fragmented, carried on the breeze that tugged at Marin's cloak. He didn't turn, but the detachment that had armored him for seasons began to crack. Their eyes, unseen but felt, pressed like fingers on his spine, dissecting his every motion. This was no mere patrol. It was performance, their faith a web tightening around his solitude. The lantern warmed in his grasp, its light flickering as if sensing the shift, pulling at him with a subtle insistence. Was it warmth or warning? He tightened his hold, forcing the flame even, but the whispers burrowed deeper, stirring a wariness that coiled in his chest like the mist itself. Marin stepped forward, lantern raised, the glow carving a fragile corridor through the fog. The villagers' murmurs followed, a chorus of expectation and unease, binding him tighter to the duty he could no longer ignore. Could he walk this edge again, commanding the light's caprice, when their anxious faith hummed like a gathering storm? The flame held steady, for now, but the air thickened with the weight of what it might yet claim. Later that morning, as the mist lingered in the hollows, the lantern's flame flickered in the stone mill's hearth, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the walls like forgotten hands. I, Marin Voss, sat across from Eli Weatherstone, the elder's gnarled fingers tracing invisible patterns on the worn table, his eyes milky with years of staring into the mist. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp wool and grinding stone, each breath pulling at my chest like a tide I couldn't resist. "Listen close, boy," Eli rasped, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the wood between us. Not the polished tales the villagers spin at dusk. This one's cracked, like the path itself. He leaned in, breath sour with elderberry wine, and began unraveling the threadbare legend, the one about the child. She was no more than 8 summers, they said, a slip of a girl with braids like twisted vines, lost in the ravine after a storm. My hands, calloused from polishing the lantern's glass, tightened on the table's edge. Doubt crept in, not as a shout, but a tremor, a quivering unease that uncoiled in my gut, spreading to my limbs like frost on the ravine stones. The villagers' silence outside, pressed against the door, their reverent hush now a weight, fueling the anxiety that made my pulse stutter. Eli watched me, his gaze a mirror to my own unraveling certainty. The lantern's legend, once a comforting glow in the background of our lives, now loomed distorted, its flame baiting the darkness rather than banishing it. And in that hollow space between his words and my silence, the question lingered. What if the promised city was no haven, but a calculated deception, designed to demand our blind obedience? As the day wore on into uneasy quiet, the fog clung to the village square like a shroud half drawn. The stone mill's distant grind, a low dirge against the dawn's reluctant seep. I watched from the lantern's perch, its flame a captive pulse in my palm, as the newcomer staggered into the circle of huddled forms. Ilya Mercer, they called him. Pale as bone-bleached rock, eyes sunken hollows that flickered with something not quite life. The villagers parted like mist before wind, their whispers coiling. A wanderer, pulled from the ravine's edge by dawn patrol, murmuring of lights in the gloom. He collapsed against the well's rim, breath ragged, hands trembling as he clutched at the air. The glow, it found me, he rasped, voice threading through the stillness like a frayed rope. Out there, beyond the ridge, where the farewell way twists into nothing. I was lost, senses unraveling, when the lantern's fire bloomed, steady, calling. It led me to the boundary, whispered promises of passage. I followed, just to the edge, and something pushed me back, unseen hands, or the mist itself. I lived. The words hung, a spark in the damp air. Eli? Weatherstone leaned forward, his fractured memories stirring behind rheumy eyes, while the others pressed closer, faces alight with that old hunger, hope laced with the village's unspoken dread. They murmured assent, hands reaching as if to touch the miracle he described, their dependence blooming like frost on glass. But I felt it shift, this fragile testimony, worming into the cracks of my ritual. The lantern warmed in my grip, its glow casting elongated shadows that danced like accusations across the square. Was this salvation, or another lure dressed in survivor's rags? Wary at first, I held back, the flame's flicker mirroring the caution in my chest, a mental image forming unbidden, the light as a siren's thread, drawing him not from peril, but toward it, only to release him as bait for the next. He met my gaze then, pleading, "Guide me further, keeper. Let it lead me through." The villagers echoed him, their eyes turning to me, pinning me with expectation, the weight of their need tightening like vines around my resolve. Suspicion coiled deeper now, sharp as the mist's chill bite. His tale rang too neatly against the legends, too vivid for one who claimed the void's embrace. Had the light spared him to mock me, to prove its hunger insatiable, or was he its unwitting herald, pulling us all toward the boundary? The lantern burned brighter in my hand, a symbol no longer distant, but insistent, its warmth a question etched in fire. Could I trust this survivor without becoming the very tool that fed the flame? The square held its breath, the grind of the mill echoing my fracturing duty, as Ilya's hollow eyes waited for my answer. With the echoes of Ilya's words still lingering in the air, Marin trudged toward the threshold of the withering way, his boots sinking into the damp earth with each determined step. The lantern swung at his side, its unlit wick a silent vow against the encroaching dusk. He felt the weight of it like an old friend's hand on his shoulder, steady, unyielding. The village lights flickered behind him, distant as forgotten stars, but he pressed on, fueled by the ritual's pull, the duty that had carved him hollow, yet kept him whole. As the path's edge loomed, the mist rose to meet him, not in gentle curls, but as a living shroud, coiling from the underbrush like fingers testing the air. It wrapped around his ankles first, cool and insistent, then climbed higher, blurring the line where ground met sky. Marin's heart quickened, a drumbeat echoing in his chest, each thump louder than the last, as if the fog itself were squeezing the rhythm from him. He inhaled sharply, but his breath emerged as a ragged whisper, stolen by the damp veil, turning exhale to echo. The mist thickened, pressing in from all sides, narrowing the world to a corridor of gray. It whispered against his skin, not words, but suggestions, insidious and formless, urging him to turn back, to let the light die unborn. What if this glow he carried was no beacon, but a lure into the void? The thought clawed at him, his resolve fracturing into a tremor that started in his fingers and spread to his core. He gripped the lantern tighter, knuckles whitening, forcing himself to stare into the haze. There, duty anchored him, a fragile thread against the pull. Behind the veil, he sensed the village's unease growing, whispers of doubt from Madame Thorne's stern gaze, the younger one's averted eyes, and Elias, that returned shadow, mirrored his own haunted stare from afar, a crack in the isolation, though the distance lingered like the mist itself. The light demanded more now, a brighter burn to pierce this trap of vapor and fear, where promise twisted into peril. Marin's hand trembled as he raised the lantern, the wick catching with a hiss. But in the fog's embrace, a shiver rippled through him. What if the path had already turned foe, waiting to claim its keeper? Deeper into the gathering dusk, the mist stirred like a living shroud, coiling around Marin's boots as he paused on the threshold of the withering way. The lantern in his grasp flickered, its flame a fragile heartbeat against the encroaching gray. He had always carried it with the steady rhythm of duty, hope's quiet sentinel, drawing the lost toward whatever peace lay beyond. But tonight, the fog thickened, birthing shapes from its depths, faint outlines of faces, half-formed and pleading, their eyes like smudged ink on wet parchment. Whispers slithered through the haze, not the wind's idle murmur, but voices, soft, insistent, threading into his thoughts like roots seeking soil. Follow. We followed, they breathed, a chorus of the departed, their tones laced with the sweetness of forgotten dreams. Marin froze, the lantern's warmth seeping into his palms, stirring a flicker of that old hope, the belief that his light could mend what the dark had torn. He saw them in his mind's eye, not ghosts, but echoes of the village's tales, the ones Madame Thorne recited by firelight. A young herder, chasing the glow to reclaim his sister's laughter, only for both to dissolve into silence. A widow's son, lured by promises of reunion, his hopes melting like frost under dawn. Each story a thread, pulling at Marin's resolve, reminding him that the light he tended was both beacon and betrayer. The whispers grew bolder, curling around the lantern's glass, dimming its glow to a hesitant pulse. Why hold on? One sighed. A child's voice, laced with wonder, turned to ache. We were free in the following. Marin's chest tightened, the weight of their pain settling like damp earth on his shoulders. It wasn't just duty anymore. It was the raw throb of their losses bleeding into his own solitude, amplifying the guilt that gnawed at him nightly. He had isolated himself for this, for them, believing the burden solitary would spare the living. But here, in the fog's embrace, he felt the village's unspoken grief mirroring his own, the light no longer a distant talisman, but a cruel reflection of all they'd surrendered to it. A shiver rippled through him, chasing away the warmth of hope, leaving only the chill of doubt. The faces pressed closer, their whispers a symphony of what-ifs, urging him to choose, release the flame and join the vanished, or cling tighter, perpetuating the cycle of longing. How could he sustain this glow when every flicker echoed their undone dreams? The mist held its breath, waiting. As the whispers swelled into a desperate tide, the lantern's flame flickered like a captured heartbeat, its golden pulse devouring the whispers that slithered from the mist. Marin stood at the threshold, observer to the unraveling, his hands trembling around the iron handle as if it were a vein pulsing with forbidden life. The light bloomed outward, not as a beacon, but a voracious maw, swallowing the veiled choir's murmurs one by one. "Guide us," they had pleaded earlier, voices like frost-kissed leaves. Now, only echoes of dread remained, twisted into guttural moans that clawed at the villagers' ears. In the village square, shadows lengthened under the fog's weight. Madame Thorne clutched her shawl, her eyes wide as the air thickened, reality fraying at the edges. Cottages blurred, their outlines softening into spectral smears, while the ground beneath seemed to tilt, as if the earth itself recoiled from the lantern's glare. Elias Rift, huddled against a weathered wall, his returned gaze fracturing, pupils dilating into voids that mirrored the encroaching haze. The fear swelled, a living tide. Children whimpered in their mothers' arms. Elders murmured prayers that dissolved into silence. It wasn't the mist alone. It was the light feeding on their terror, amplifying it until breaths came ragged, hearts hammered in unison. Marin's chest tightened, anxiety coiling like smoke in his lungs, sharpening into something acute, insistent, a blade of realization. He watched the flame warp the world, faces in the crowd contorted, not by wind, but by the glow's insistent pull, drawing their doubts into the open. The lantern, his solemn charge, wasn't just illuminating, it was reshaping, bending the veil between seen and unseen. Duty, he thought, surges beyond mere fire. It's this devouring empathy, this bridge I cannot cross alone. Yet as the mist pressed closer, coiling around ankles like possessive fingers, the villagers stirred, their isolation cracked. Glances met, shared in the lantern's merciless reveal. Their fear, once a private specter, now fed on itself, binding them in reluctant proximity. Thorne's hand brushing Elias's, a silent admission that the dread was theirs to bear together. The flame leaped higher, casting erratic shadows that danced like accusations. Whispers faded entirely, leaving only the raw pulse of apprehension. The fog a canvas for light's dual tyranny, comfort in its warmth, terror in its unyielding stare. Could this glow, meant to part the dark, instead erect an impenetrable barrier, walling off the very peace it promised? The question hung, unanswered, as the mist thickened, reality trembling on the brink. In the deepening hush that followed, Marin teetered on the ragged lip of the void, where the ground crumbled into nothing but a yawning hush. The air hung thick, laced with the chill of unseen breaths, pulling at him like fingers from below. His hands trembled, one clutching the lantern's iron handle, its glass belly flickering with a flame that seemed too alive, too insistent. The light beckoned, a golden thread unraveling into the emptiness, whispering promises of purpose amid the senseless churn of nights past. Doubt clawed at his chest, a frantic pulse that blurred his vision. What if this ritual was just echoes in the dark, a hollow spin of duty that devoured more than it saved? The weight of it pressed down, heavier than the fog that clung to his cloak. Years of solitary vigils, the lantern his only companion, now feeling like chains forged from his own fears. He could snuff it out. One breath, one twist of the wick, and the pull would cease. No more guiding what couldn't be seen. No more the gnawing ache of souls slipping away under his watch. Freedom, perhaps, in the letting go. But then what? A life unmoored? The village's fragile hope guttering like a spent match? A faint murmur rose, not from the wind, but deeper, threading through the cracks in his resolve. Echoes of voices long faded, their pleas sharp as splintered bone. "Stay," they sighed. Or was it "go"? The lantern warmed his palm, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat, syncing with his own ragged rhythm. It wasn't obligation anymore. It was his to claim or cast aside. Anxiety coiled tighter, a serpent in his gut, visions flashing of himself dissolving into that same indifferent dark, lost like the ones he'd failed to anchor. Yet as the flame danced, casting shadows that twisted like reaching hands, something shifted. The light wasn't devouring him. It illuminated the choice, sharp and unyielding. He could end it, yes, but in that ending, what meaning would remain? The village stirred in his mind's eye, their distant lights winking like stars, waiting for the bridge he alone could span. His grip steadied, fingers curling firm around the handle. Not surrender, but a deliberate step forward, the flame leaping brighter as resolve hardened in his veins, chasing the chill away. The void waited, patient and vast. Could he douse the light and still hold on to why it burned? With that resolve, flickering like an inner flame, the mist coils like a lover's breath, cold and insistent, wrapping fingers around my ankles, where the withering way ends and the village begins. I stand at the threshold, the lantern heavy in my grasp, its flame a fragile pulse against the encroaching gray. It pulls me, this fog, whispers of the departed threading through my veins, promising release in the swallow of endless night. Every night I've fed it my solitude, lighting the way for souls who dissolve into its hunger. And now it hungers for me. The light trembles, one flick of my wrist, and it gutters out, freeing us all from this tether. Or does it? The glow warms my palm, a deceptive hearth, drawing me deeper even as it illuminates the lie I've clutched, that my isolation safeguards you. But what if the ritual is no chain, but a choice? The veiled choir murmurs from the haze, their voices a chorus of what-ifs. Elias's haunted eyes flashing in my mind, his return a crack in the darkness, proof that some lights endure. I feel the pull sharpen, anticipation knotting my chest like frost-laced wire, the mist's edge blurring my boots, urging surrender. Yet here, in this suspended breath, resolve hardens. The lantern isn't mine alone to hoard. It's a spark for the fire we all carry, the elders' trembling pleas, the young ones' defiant stares. If I step into the void, the light dies with me. But if I extend it, share its flicker across these gathered faces, does it dim my own or multiply? The fog thickens, tasting of salt and forgotten names, and I hesitate, the flame dancing wild. Can this burden fracture into something shared? A communal glow defying the dark's maw? The village holds its breath, shadows lengthening as the lantern swings low, beckoning, not to oblivion, but perhaps to dawn. In that fragile moment of turning back toward the gathered shadows, the lantern's flame flickered in my grasp, a captive star straining against the glass, its glow dulling the encroaching mist like a bruise on the twilight. I stood at the ridge's edge, the village's stone mill groaning faintly below, its echoes a reminder of the weight we'd all carried, unquestioned, unyielding. The mist coiled at my heels, whispering not temptations now, but accusations. Surrender, keeper, you fed us long enough. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from the resolve hardening in my chest, a fire I'd long mistaken for duty's ash. I could snuff it out, one breath, deliberate, and the light would die, unraveling the thread that bound us all. The path would claim no more, but neither would hope return. Eli's fractured tales, Ilya's hollow gaze, they'd fade into the fog, and the villagers, those silent sentinels of tradition, would mourn not just me, but the illusion I'd upheld. Their whispers would turn to wails, the ravine's mouth yawning wider without its lure. Or I could stay, grip the lantern tighter, let its warmth seep into my veins, and turn it, not as blind guide, but as warden of our shared shadows. Determination surged, a pulse against the pull. I raised the lantern high, its beam cutting through the haze, illuminating the faces emerging from the village. Eli first, his eyes sharp with unspoken plea, then others, their reverence cracking into raw need. No more automatic vigils. This light would question itself, demand accountability from the darkness it pierced. The mist recoiled, hissing retreat, but I felt its truth linger. Holding the flame meant wrestling it, risking the burn. As the glow steadied, bathing the trailhead in reluctant clarity, acceptance settled like dawn's first hush. The village stirred below, voices rising in tentative chorus. Not grief, but a fragile alliance. I lowered the lantern, its weight now mine to redefine, and stepped back from the brink. The light endured, but so did I, changed, watchful. Yet in the flame's depths, a shadow danced. Could I truly hold it without it consuming me whole?